The old man's voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible over the crackling of the campfire. His words seemed to carry the weight of ages, as if he had seen countless horrors and lived to tell the tale. He spoke of shadows and fear, of things that lurked just beyond the edge of the light. His voice trembled as he recounted the tales of the dark forest, where the trees seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared to listen. He told of Madam Orla. She wasn't always a monster, he said. Once she was a kind and gentle soul, beloved by all who knew her. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, now glared with a cold, unyielding hatred. Once she was the village healer. She had a gift for curing ailments and easing pain. The villagers would come to her with their troubles, and she would always find a way to help them. They turned on her, these villagers. In their fear and ignorance, they sought a scapegoat for their suffering. Their once grateful hearts turned to stone, and they became a frenzied mob. They blamed her for a plague, a sickness that swept through the village like a dark cloud, leaving death and despair in its wake. They pointed their fingers at her, accusing her of witchcraft and dark magic, a sickness that ravaged their children. The young ones, once full of life and laughter, now lay in their beds, feverish and weak. The parents' hearts were filled with sorrow and desperation. They burned her, he said, eyes wide and gleaming in the firelight, burned her alive. The flames roared into the night sky, consuming her body but not her spirit, oh, her spirit remained. Twisted and vengeful, it lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to exact its revenge on those who had wronged her. Now she preys on their children, a hungry ghost in the night, stealing them away. Her presence is felt in the cold wind that sweeps through the village, in the eerie silence that follows, leaving only silence. His words hung in the air, heavy with dread. The children listened, their eyes wide with fear, as the old man's tale painted a picture of a world where the past never truly dies. His words hung in the air, heavy with dread. A chill wind rustled the trees. The leaves whispered secrets of their own, adding to the eerie atmosphere. It was as if the very forest was alive, listening to the old man's story. Their branches clawed at the night sky like skeletal fingers. The children huddled closer, eyes wide with terror. They could almost feel Madam Orla's presence, lurking just beyond the firelight. But the old man just chuckled, a dry, crackling sound. It was a laugh that held no warmth, only the cold, hard truth of his tale. It's just a story, children, a bedtime tale. He tried to reassure them, but the fear in their eyes told him that they knew better. But his eyes held a spark of fear, a flicker of knowing. He had seen things that could not be explained, and in the depths of his soul he knew that Madam Orla's spirit was still out there, waiting. The Miller family arrived in the twilight. Their laughter echoed through the silent village square, a jarring sound against the backdrop of stillness. They didn't notice the way the villagers watched. Eyes narrowed, lips pursed. Didn't see the way they clutched their own children close. John Miller, a tall man with kind eyes, unloaded the wagon. His wife Sarah herded their two children, little Daniel and baby Emma, towards their new home.
"Leave this place," she whispered. "Leave while you still can."
"I'm sorry, I didn't catch that."
"The eater," she muttered. "She craves the young."
Then she was gone, melting back into the shadows. Sarah shivered, a sudden chill running down her spine. A strange uneasiness settled over her. The night was thick with silence, the kind of silence that feels almost tangible, wrapping around everything like a suffocating blanket. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath, as if they too sensed the dread that hung in the air. Sarah woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She had felt a presence, or perhaps the sudden absence of one. Emma, she was gone. The crib was empty, the soft blanket undisturbed, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. A cold terror gripped Sarah's heart. She shook John awake, her hands trembling with fear and desperation.
"Emma!" she cried, her voice shrill with panic. "She's gone!" Her words echoed in the stillness, amplifying her terror.
John, groggy at first, shot out of bed. They searched frantically, their movements frantic and disjointed. The house, the yard, the silent, watching woods at the edge of their property. Every shadow seemed to mock their desperation, but there was no sign of their baby girl, only the oppressive silence pressing down on them like a weight, and a faint, sweet smell lingering in the air. Like overripe fruit, it was out of place and unsettling. John tried to calm Sarah, but his own voice trembled with fear. He felt as helpless as she did. The villagers, their faces grim, gathered around. They had been through this before, and their presence was both a comfort and a curse. They had seen it all before, the same fear, the same loss. It was a story too familiar to them, felt the icy grip of loss. They offered no comfort, only the shared weight of their collective grief, only knowing glances and whispered condolences. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, filled with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. Days bled into nights, each one more agonizing than the last. Hope turned to ashes in Sarah's mouth, leaving a bitter taste that she couldn't wash away. The villagers whispered of the child eater, a legend that had haunted their village for generations. Their words were laced with fear and a strange acceptance, as if they had resigned themselves to this fate. They spoke of a shadowy figure, a woman with eyes like burning coals and a hunger that could never be sated, a creature of the night, preying on the innocent. Sarah refused to believe them, shaking her head in denial every time the story was mentioned. She clung to the memory of Emma's laughter, a sound that once filled their home with joy, her tiny hand clutching Sarah's finger, a bond that seemed unbreakable. But deep down, a seed of dread had taken root, growing with each passing day. Fueled by the villagers' whispers and the echoing emptiness of her home, the fear became almost unbearable. One night, driven to the edge by grief and desperation, Sarah stumbled into the woods, her heart heavy with sorrow. Sobbing, she collapsed beneath a gnarled oak tree, the weight of her loss pressing down on her. As she wept, a voice cold and sharp as shattered glass cut through the night, sending chills down her spine.
You dare mourn what you could not protect? The voice was filled with contempt and anger.
Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Standing before her was a woman shrouded in darkness. Her skin was ashen, her eyes glowed with an unnatural light piercing through the darkness. And around her neck hung a silver rattle. Emma's rattle, a cruel reminder of what had been lost. Terror threatened to consume Sarah, but rage was a wildfire in her veins. This creature, this monster, had taken her baby.
Give her back! Give me back my daughter!
The woman, Madam Orla, threw back her head and laughed. A chilling sound that echoed through the ancient trees.
They were mine to take. The children belong to me.
The forest around them stirred. Shadows twisted and coalesced, taking on grotesque shapes. The spirits of children, their eyes hollow, their forms ethereal, gathered around their captor. Their mournful cries sent shivers down Sarah's spine. But even in the face of such horror, Sarah felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. These children, these lost souls, needed her. She wouldn't let them face this monster alone. A deep primal anger ignited within Sarah. It pulsed through her, banishing fear, replacing it with a mother's fury. She saw the faces of the children more clearly now, their pain, their terror, but also a flicker of hope. They recognized her grief, understood her rage. They would help her. She could feel it.
You will pay for what you've done. You will not take another child. I won't let you.
The wind picked up, swirling around Sarah, whipping her hair into a frenzy. The air crackled with energy. She felt a strange power coursing through her, drawn from the sorrow and fury of the lost children. The battle raged, not with swords and steel, but with anguish and despair. Madam Orla, her power fueled by centuries of hatred and stolen innocence, lashed out at Sarah. Shadows whipped and snapped, thorns sprung from the earth, attempting to ensnare her. But Sarah, empowered by a mother's love and the collective grief of the lost children, fought back with a ferocity she never knew she possessed. She dodged the shadows, her own pain a shield against their despair. She tore at the thorns, her tears watering the ground, weakening their hold. The children, their forms flickering like candle flames, swirled around the witch. Their whispers, filled with sorrow and longing, chipped away at Madam Orla's power. She shrieked in fury, her control waning. The first rays of dawn pierced through the canopy, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. Weakened and defeated, Madam Orla let out a gut-wrenching wail. The silver rattle slipped from her grasp, falling to the ground with a dull thud. The children, their forms growing fainter in the growing light, clustered around Sarah. Their touch was a whisper of ice and gratitude. Then, with the rising sun, they too faded, leaving Sarah standing alone amongst the ancient trees. With a final, lingering look of hatred, she dissolved into the shadows, her screams echoing through the trees. She had fought with the fury of 1,000 mothers, but her victory was bittersweet. The millers left the village as quickly as they had arrived. The villagers watched them go, their faces etched with a familiar blend of pity and relief. The curse of the child eater had been temporarily broken, but they knew it was only a matter of time before she returned. For their sins, they were bound to this cycle of fear and loss.
They never learn. The eater is always hungry.
As the miller's wagon disappeared down the dusty road, a new family arrived in the village square. A young couple, their faces filled with hope, unloaded their belongings. They laughed, oblivious to the shadows lengthening around them, unaware of the whispers carried on the wind. The old woman, her face a mask of sorrow, watched from the shadows.